consider it a real honor to host this event for LifeWorks, and it's a real pleasure to see all of you here today. This is the second in what we hope to be a long series of talking points about LifeWorks and about what we do and how it affects society as a whole. We often have an opportunity to talk about the projects that we run. We talk about the individuals we serve. Those are very, very important. But what gets lost is, what do we do really for the real world out there? I want to acknowledge Steve Clark, who unfortunately isn't here. But he and Pamplin Community Newspapers are a major sponsor of this event. So when I see him next time, I'll thank him. The program today is very simple and straightforward. I'm going to introduce Mary Monett, who's going to make a few remarks, and then she will introduce our special guest today, Commissioner Nick Fish. Nick is then going to speak about housing for a healthy community, and then we're all going to have an opportunity to comment and ask questions. So let's get started. Mary Monett has been president and CEO of LifeWorks Northwest since 1998. She started as a dependency and mental health therapist in 1983 before moving through the managerial ranks. I can tell you Mary is a terrific financial manager and an even better leader, and she's very active in many volunteer positions, including Jesuit High School, Vision Action Network, and United Way. Mary.
Thank you so much, Scott, for hosting us, and I just extend the welcome. We in the mental health business, what's really important about that parking is we like to validate people. Couldn't resist. Today, I'm not going to talk a lot about LifeWorks Northwest, because really what this series is about is really trying to engage a conversation about the issues we work with. So for those who don't know, LifeWorks Northwest, we do provide mental health and addiction services across the lifespan in the 3 metro counties. So we serve approximately, I think, 16,000 lives in the metro area each year. And what we really feel strongly about is contributing to the overall health. We see what we do as really building a stronger community. And today we're excited to have Commissioner Fish with us to talk about a key component in that mix is safe, affordable housing. We at LifeWorks, like I said, we provide mental health and addiction services and limited housing. That's not our core piece of work. What we really try to do is partner. I see Jean out there with great partners who do provide housing, that we provide the service piece. And what's important in terms of this housing is when we looked at, we ran for years a residential treatment program for women and kids. And we had what we thought were fabulous outcomes. Over 60% of the women post-treatment a year later were doing well, clean and sober. So we thought that's phenomenal given their histories and their background. And this was in Washington County, one of our facilities. And we added a transitional and then a longer-term housing component to that program. And 3 years later, 90% of the women were clean and sober at discharge or at a year's completion. So we saw what a huge, huge piece the housing added to the success of those clients. So today, our hope is we have Commissioner Fish here who can talk even more about the critical need and what the housing piece adds to our overall service array. So it's my great pleasure to get to introduce Commissioner Fish. And I first met Nick, I'm sure you don't remember this, but we were on a walk for the African American Health Coalition. I think it was during your campaign, and I had a chance to walk.
Which campaign?
The ongoing. But seriously, what struck me was just your passion for the underserved, and that came through loud and clear. So Nick was first elected to City Council in 2008, winning 68% of the vote in a 5-candidate race, and he was recently reelected and received 80% of the vote. So high praise. He's a Harvard graduate, class of 1981, and came to Portland in the mid-90s as his wife, Patricia, was offered a job at Portland State teaching. He has kids who are 6 and 17 and has a great passion for watching them play soccer. And he is the commissioner in charge of both the Portland Housing Bureau, which is relevant, obviously, for today, and the Portland Parks and Rec Bureau. His background as a civil rights lawyer and advocate for affordable housing, not to mention his extensive volunteer service. I know he's on the board at Volunteers of America, have proved valuable in his first term in office, and he now has at least the next 4 years to continue to make a difference. So please help me welcome Commissioner Nichols.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that very kind introduction. And I'm delighted to join you today. And, you know, as I look around, I'm reminded what a small town Portland is, because, I mean, almost everybody in this room is someone that I have history with, and most of the history is current. We're working on projects together. I'll just give you an example. Jay Isaac today, for example, told me where LeBron James is going, but he swore me to secrecy.
He's going to the bank.
As was mentioned, I have the honor of serving with Kay Turan on Volunteers of America Oregon Board. Last year, Kay was acknowledged by her peers as the CEO of the year for the great work that she does, so that's a great honor. When I practiced law, and I'm now a recovering lawyer, I used to have cases before the Honorable Al Bannock, who was one of our great mediators and problem solvers. There isn't a week that goes by when I don't get an email from Clayton Herring reminding me that it's about jobs, which I very much appreciate. And I have a connection to everybody, almost everybody in this room, and I treasure those connections, and I'm grateful for the counsel that you give me and the constructive criticism that I receive from many of you on a regular basis. And hopefully it'll make me better at what I do. Before I launch into what I want to say, I just want to acknowledge that I did take my first vacation as a public official recently, and I went down to Miami to drop my daughter off. She's doing the Amigos program, and we'll be spending 7 weeks in Honduras at La Paz. And we spent 2 days together. My daughter's 17 years old, so it was an interesting experiment. And what struck me about Miami, though, is that there are all of these ghostly towers all over the place representing the enormous overbuilding of condominiums that occurred during the go-go days. And you can get a condo in downtown Miami for at least half off the original price. But it's really staggering because you see these buildings that are just empty and that were built, you know, these enormous towers that are empty and that litter the downtown skyline. When I went to New York City after dropping my daughter off to visit family and friends, I was struck by actually how much vitality there is. And one thing that was thrilling to see is there are finally cranes in the air at Ground Zero. So the legal wrangling has concluded at least on part of that, and now they're beginning to build. I had lunch with the Parks Commissioner, Adrian Benepe, and was reminded about where we fit in the sort of broader picture of sister cities. Just to put it in terms of scale, he told me that under Mayor Bloomberg, they had launched a capital program to enhance and expand their parks with a $5 billion down payment. Now, I think in New York, you don't have to go to the voters the way we do on a capital bond measure, but $5 billion is a lot of money. There's a lot going on. So it's nice to be back in a more temperate environment. It was very hot and humid in New York. This is great by comparison. Mary, thank you for inviting me. I'm a huge fan of LifeWorks Northwest. And I also just want to single out and acknowledge my friend Scott Andrews. I am very fond of this concept of servant leadership. And we know them when we see them. And they are people that are deeply engaged in our community, making a difference. And the servant piece comes before the leadership piece. They are true servants of the public. And Scott is not only a great ambassador for LifeWorks Northwest, but he's a superb partner as the chair of the Portland Development Commission. So I'm very honored to be with you today as well, my friend. So I thought I'd begin by just sketching out a little bit the relationship between LifeWorks and the city of Portland, because I think it provides some essential context. And I want to begin with a statement that for some of you will be a revelation. For others, you've heard it before. The city of Portland does not build housing. We're not in the housing business. What we are is essentially the bank or the investment banker or the conduit that parks money with trusted nonprofits and some for-profits that do the heavy lifting for us. So we're in the relationship business. We don't build housing. We're not the Housing Authority of Portland. We don't own and operate housing as a general matter. We work with trusted partners. And that's where LifeWorks Northwest is so important to what we do, because they provide critical services that are essential to making our supportive housing work. And you're going to hear a lot about that today and in the future, but just as a kind of a primer, the great innovation in affordable housing since 1980 was the notion of supportive housing. And it took us a long time to figure this out. We had all the data in front of us. The fact that most of the people who were very low income or homeless were, disproportionately were among them people who were challenged with drug and alcohol addiction or mental illness. We never really connected the dots, and finally a movement was born around the supportive housing movement, which recognized that just giving someone a place to live was not enough, and that you would not guarantee any kind of successful outcomes. That unless you married services with housing, you weren't going to transform lives. And that's what the supportive housing movement has demonstrated. It's become the model and how we do things. So the city partners with generally two kinds of people. People that help us build housing and people that help us provide the services to those who are in housing. And LifeWorks does some tremendous work around services, and I'll just highlight three things. Through the Portland's Children's Levy, they get funds to provide after-school services in partnership with the Housing Authority of Portland. LifeWorks Northwest provides mental health services through the Shelter Plus Care voucher program at various sites throughout the city. And they provide supportive services in a number of our affordable housing developments, and most recently in Shaver Green. So we think very highly of the work that they do and are very proud of that partnership. But let's step back for a moment and sort of take the temperature of the big picture challenge that we face as a community. Everybody in this room shares a common value proposition, which is we believe that everyone should have a safe and decent and affordable place to call home. And many of us, from the day we were born, have taken that for granted. What we also know, though, for our most vulnerable citizens, and particularly those struggling with mental health and addiction challenges, a stable home is absolutely critical to the recovery. Without a stable home, we will not be successful in turning those lives around. Unfortunately, for too many people, a home has become a challenge, an insurmountable challenge in our community. I'll just give you one example. We estimate that there are about 15,000 individuals in Portland alone who are in this income range between 0 and 30% of median family income. So, Becky, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but about 0 to 30,000 for a household of 4, something like that? Or less, actually, probably 21,000, who cannot find through market systems a housing that they can afford. And when we talk about affordable housing, we're talking about housing where a family spends 30% or less of their income. When you start spending much more than 30%, you're beginning to crowd out things like food and other necessities. So let's take the pulse of Oregon. And I'm going to start with Oregon, even though it's a little deceptive, because Portland is a small bubble within Oregon. But we rank in the top 5 now in 4 very dubious statistics. We are top 5 nationally in homelessness, in hunger, in unemployment, and then, thanks to the most recent data, we're now 3rd in the nation in foreclosures. And foreclosures has really been we've been a lagging indicator there. For a while, we used to take pride in saying we're only in the top 20. We're now in the top 5. And what we're seeing is those most what I call despicable mortgage products, the subprime mortgage products, which were sold to people that either had they had some better advice would not have gotten into them, or it was the only way they could get into a home, but they were doomed for failure. Those people are beginning to find themselves in an untenable position or losing their homes. My wife calling, excuse me, in an untenable at a very high rate. Sorry, honey. Yes, just take the kids to the hospital. I'll talk to you later. I may need some of the legal advice from my distinguished lawyers that's here later. So let's put the human face for a moment on the data. Because I think we all our eyes start glazing over. Say top 5 hunger, homelessness, unemployment, foreclosure. It's almost too much to fathom. But what it means in a very tangible, earthy way is that a lot of children went to bed last night hungry and without a single healthy, nutritious meal. What it means is that someone, each of us in this room knows, is suffering from significant mental health issues and last night slept on the streets. It means that some family in our zip code is about to lose their home and has no option, no plan for how they're going to deal with that. And it means that dozens of our friends and former co-workers and family members are still looking for work and are growing very discouraged and unable to provide for themselves. So that's a discouraging snapshot of where we are as a state. Now, as I acknowledged, Portland is a bubble in Oregon, and we have not been hit as hard, but we're seeing a pattern similar to the state. So in Portland last night, we estimate about 1,600 people slept outside. And we have this debate in lots of different settings. I just want to assure you that based on all the evidence we have, for the vast majority of those people, that is not a choice. And if it is a choice, it is not a rational choice, which we can talk about the civil liberties implications of that at some point later. About a third of those people are adults struggling with mental illness. And remember that number for a second, because I'm going to come back to a unique collaboration between the city and the county that we launched recently. But when you start talking about the numbers, the cost of actually providing the services, I think your head's going to start spinning. In the fall of 2008, how did I turn this off? Now she's texting me.
Which hospital?
When you start getting the text, you know you're in trouble.
Should I be sitting in for you?
No, thank you. It's such a smart phone that I don't even know how to turn it off. In the fall of 2008, we surveyed about 600 people living on the streets, and we used a national organization that's very skilled at this and does this all over the place, and frankly, being one step removed from any of our teams, eliminates the likelihood that someone would say that there's a bias here. This is a third party that came in, and they created what's known as a vulnerability index. What they learned just off the 600 people that they talked to, and these are people that agreed to waive their confidentiality rights, gave their name, some other information can be verified. 230 of them were either reported or were observed to have acute mental illness. So that's just under a third, under half. 279 either reported or were observed to have a history of substance abuse. 217 had a dual diagnosis. And 45%, and the number is even higher just among women, 45% of the people reported being a victim of a violent attack since becoming homeless. The numbers for women in the first 48 hours of homelessness are just off the charts in terms of sexual assaults. 730 ER visits in the last 3 months alone out of that 600-person cohort. 730 ER visits. Now, those of you, Priscilla, Providence, and others, you start doing the math here as we start providing primary care services to homeless people with addictions and mental illness through our hospital emergency rooms. No health care plan ever devised by Congress is ever going to help us solve that problem. And the estimated cost we calculate is about $500 a visit. And that does not include the cost of an ambulance. And if you ever have an ambulance from the county come to your home to take a child or a loved one, 2 blocks away to the hospital, that's an $800 charge. And it's an $800 charge because of all the uncompensated care that's shifted to those of us who can pay. So in the face of these challenging numbers, what we need more than ever is a good team across government, across business, nonprofit, faith, working together to solve the problem. And the great part about my job is that I am on a daily basis dealing with the problem solvers who are commemorating the positive developments and where they're making a difference. And it is through innovation and through partnership that we're able to make some significant progress. And it's why I actually am very optimistic about my work and about the future, despite the data. So let me give you a couple of examples. In the past month, we opened 3 new developments. Walnut Park in Northeast, Martha, Washington, and today we'll be opening the Admiral Apartments, which is a beautiful building. It's been renovated, which is across from Director Park. And those are 3 enormous success stories that rely on a multitude of public and private financing to make them go. They are assets in any community when you see the buildings, and in each one, an architect has done some marvelous value engineering, and some very creative people have squeezed the last dollar out of the budget to give people something great. So very proud of that. In the last few months, the city and Multnomah County have come together to create a crisis and treatment center, which is known as CAT-C. I have a feeling that will change. This is a collaboration where we'll take the old Hooper detox space and we'll put 16 beds, and this will be for people who are primarily picked up by the police or others and are in great distress and need an immediate intervention. Think chassis. When you find someone like Mr. Chassis on the street, where do you take them to get that immediate intervention? The capital costs for that project are over about $2.5 million. And thank goodness for urban renewal dollars, because we're taking some out of the Central East Side. The annual operating costs are over $1 million. And the city and the county have agreed to split that. And this is yet another example of the city and county collaborating. And the truth is, despite whatever the rhetoric you may hear or read, the city is a primary funder now of many of the core county initiatives through pass-throughs, through collaborations and others. And as Becky and I like to say, and Becky's boss, Commissioner Kafori, most of the people we serve simply don't care who's paying for it and who's providing the service. They want to see a service that meets their needs. And increasingly, the city and the county are getting together to do that. So $2.5 million on the capital side, $1 million of ongoing. And did I mention it's a 16-bed facility? So go back to our vulnerability survey data. 600 people, up to a half of them dual diagnosed and acute mental health challenges. We could start printing money and we wouldn't get ahead of this problem. This is one of those unique instances where resources really are the challenge, because we know that when we have the dollars, we can solve the problem. But we simply don't have the resources to match the need. 5 years ago, the city and the county launched a 10-year plan to end homelessness. I wish they had never called it that, Sandy. And so do you. Because it is, I'll let you in on a little secret, we are not going to end homelessness in 10 years. And this is an example of a group of housing insiders framing something and also following the lead of what the federal government mandated. But it's a bit of a misnomer, because even if we are 100% successful, the only thing that we will have ended is homelessness among chronically homeless individuals. And that has nothing to do with the families and children you see on the streets and a whole other swaths of the homeless population. So I've actually started spending more time cautioning people that despite the trajectory we're on, when we declare victory, you're still going to see lots of homeless people on the street, because it is designed to focus on chronically homeless. That means people who have a certain profile, and in rough speaking, they've been homeless for a long time and they have other barriers, roughly speaking. What we never anticipated, though, was as we were making huge successful strides in implementing this plan, that the rising tide would add so many people to the ranks of those in distress. But let's give ourselves a pat on the back and acknowledge that in 5 years, through this 10-year plan, we've moved 7,000 people off the streets into homes. That's a remarkable track record. That is a nationally recognized. And the secret was we had a city and county focused on a strategy. We put the resources behind it, including 30% set aside out of our urban renewal districts, and we married housing and services. Again, go back to something I said earlier. If we cheat on the services, what we know is that the housing won't work. For many of the people we're serving, it won't work because they'll be evicted. It won't work because they won't actually improve their condition, and we won't get the outcomes we're looking for. Here's the good news. When we take people with the most significant barriers, we marry housing with services, and we bring our best partners like LifeWorks Northwest to the table, they have an 81% likelihood after 12 months of still being housed. That is a staggering statistic if you look at rates of recidivism and failure across our systems. And so that tells us that this works and that we have the model and the team, and it is frankly a question of resources. So in closing, and then I hope we have time to have a robust discussion, because I know many of you in this room I've talked to privately and have very strong views across the spectrum about how we should tackle the housing challenges. I believe that this is our golden moment to make a big dent in this housing crisis. And the reason I say that is I have never felt that there were so many pieces of the puzzle aligned in a more favorable way for Portland and Oregon. So why do I say that? It sounds like maybe I need an intervention to say that, given everything I've shared with you. I say that because we have a president who is a strong advocate for an urban agenda, and that has not always been so. I say that because Secretary Donovan at HUD, who used to have the top job in New York, is a very bright and creative person who occupies a significant position in the Obama cabinet. I say that because we have two United States senators who are deeply committed to a housing agenda, and one of them, Jeff Merkley, is on the Committee of Jurisdiction, which is terrific for us to have someone on the Housing Committee. I say that because in my 13 years, 14 years in Oregon, I have never seen a better lineup across government of quality people working together. And I'm not just talking about, Deborah Kafori and Jeff Kogan and my friends at the county, or David and Rex and Carlotta and lots of others at Metro. We can go around the horn to every level. My colleagues, despite what you read, we get along. We actually cooperate and get things done much more than you would think in reading the paper. And I'll also extend that to the people who serve us in the state legislature. We have an incredibly bright and new group of people in the region who are serving the legislature, who I think are doing a great job. So we have, I think, politically the best alignment, almost the best alignment in my adult life. We have in Portland the best team that delivers any product that I know. I think the only team that comes close is the environmental movement. And I think they're kind of catching on to some of the things that the housing movement does well. But I still think housing is at the front of the pack in terms of making the case and doing the hard work politically to deliver. We also have a product that we can demonstrate locally and nationally that works. How we help people who are low income, particularly people who face many barriers, how we get them into housing, keep them in housing, and transform lives. We have a remarkable story to tell. What I believe is going to be the biggest challenge is whether we continue to have passionate and committed leadership in every sector of our community, public and private, business, nonprofit, faith, linking arms with government. If we all come together and continue to make this a priority, we're going to make great strides. If at some point we lose some heart because of the difficulties we currently face, then I would be concerned. But I'm optimistic because I see nothing but positive momentum. And I'll close by, and Danielle doesn't like me doing this anymore. She's heard this too many times. But I just read a quote from Lincoln not long ago that to me was so inspiring that I'm overusing it. And it was in his statement to Congress in 1862. And President Lincoln had a few more challenges on his plate than we do today, including the fate of the Union. But in his statement, he said, and I quote, "The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion." And from that expression have come a number of colloquialisms that got reworked and are standards in American lexicon. Rising to the occasion, not with the occasion, for one. But the occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. Well, our occasion is certainly piled high with difficulty. But the imperative, I think, is where it belongs. We collectively, not just government, but the private sector, the nonprofit, faith, all of our partners, we must rise with the occasion. And I think we're capable of doing that. And with folks like LifeWorks Northwest by our side, I know we're going to get there. So thank you very much.
Questions?
And by the way, we didn't
Yeah, we have
mean this
time.
to be exclusively about affordable housing. Sandy and her team, Sandy was not there, but Sandy's team came to see me yesterday, and we talked a little bit about the need for workforce housing in the mix. And we agree, and there's going to be some opportunities to look at that. We think home ownership is important, although given the current environment, we think it's especially important that homeowners get the skills, training they need to make sure that it's an informed choice, because one of the mistakes we made in the past is we put some people into homes that really weren't capable of following through and maintaining their home. So we're investing in programs at the front end to make sure people really understand what they're committing to and have the capacity. We believe in mixed-use development. The Resource Access Center is the one-stop center for the homeless that you see the cranes around near the train station. But we also hope to break ground in the next 6 months or so on a wonderful new development for veterans in South Waterfront, which is currently called Block 49, but we're working with our friends at PDC. So we're involved actually in a whole range of housing issues in concert with our partners at PDC. So I think Scott and I would be happy to talk about any issue in housing that's of interest to you. Dan?
Nick, a couple weeks ago, my son says that, Dad, did you know that other cities' solutions to their homeless problem is to give the homeless a free bus ticket to Portland? And I don't know where he heard it, whether it was on the radio or read it somewhere. But is that a significant issue? And I mean, I had not really heard anything about that before, and I wanted to know what you knew about it.
So, there's some anecdotal stuff that I could use to answer that, but I will tell you what we do know for sure. What we do know for sure is that if you add up all the dollars that Portland is spending for housing right now, and in this past fiscal year, through general fund, tax increment financing, and some other pots, just public investment. I'm not talking about private investment through through tax credits and other things. But if you just look at the city, we spent well over $100 million. We invested well over $100 million. What is of great concern to me is that if you look around the metro region, nobody is spending much on housing. So to your point, there is a feeling here in Portland that the strategy of some of our neighboring counties and jurisdictions is essentially, if you're in need, there's the max stop. And that's a cynical, I don't think affirmatively they're doing that. But the reality is we are covering the housing needs for a region. One of the lesser known facts about Portland Public Schools is that we have families who move here because of the robust services we provide for special needs children. And people will come here knowing that at Portland Public Schools they can get, a great package. Well, that's enormously expensive. And, so we are the provider of first and last resort for lots of things. But the one thing the mayor and I are becoming concerned about is this notion that we have these regional partners who are not really making much of an investment in housing, expecting us to do it. And the net effect is that we are carrying the needs for a region. And then, we often get accused of being too expensive and other things to boot. And if you look at what's driving some of our costs, is that we are carrying a disproportionate share of the region's load in many different areas. So that's my sort of Portland metropolitan region observation. To the extent your question calls out this notion that that there's a perverse effect of being in a leadership position on affordable housing, which is you end up being a magnet for people. We've actually seen very little data to support that. There's one group of people that probably qualifies, and that's the transients who come through, and they tend to be younger people who come through, and then they pass along during the rainy season, and they come back. And they actually provide some of the biggest challenges we have downtown, as some of you have reminded me.
Road warriors.
Yeah, and they're some of the hardest to reach. We have groups like Janus outside in do a wonderful job, but even they have faced significant challenges in getting through to these, what I call throwaway kids. And so we struggle with that, and they are transient. They do come through seasonally. But we haven't seen a lot of evidence that people are coming here because they found out in other states that this is the place to be. What we generally think, Dan, is that for most people for whom they can make a rational decision, being homeless is just not a very positive thing in their lives. And they're not moving around to take advantage of a place that's more favorable for being homeless. I'm sure on some level it goes on. But I think the bigger problem is convincing our regional partners to start stepping up and investing in housing and not sticking us with the tent. Clay?
Commissioner, I think there's some of us who we certainly understand the situation, but we question, are we focused on the symptom and underfunding the long-term cure? By that I mean education, family counseling, prenatal care. It's discouraging to think that we're underfunding those things that may be able to long-term diminish some of the things that we're having to deal with on the street today. What is your comment about that?
I put me squarely in the camp of an ounce of prevention is worth a whatever cure. I mean, what we know, if you said to Commissioner Kafori, Becky, and me, Danielle, if you said you had an extra $1 to spend, we'd probably say let's put it into rent assistance. And the reason we'd want to put it in rent assistance is we want to get to a family before they lose their apartment. Keep them in the apartment, keep the family together. Stable home allows children to go to school, learn, families stay together, and it saves us a fortune. So I'm in the prevention business, and one of the problems is because of the hand that I've been dealt, I spend way too much time in the emergency room. But we live in unprecedented times because the tide of people in distress keeps growing, and these are unusual circumstances in terms of numbers. Yes, if we could at some point stabilize the core of the hardest to house people, and let's not kid ourselves, the hardest to house people, we're not going to get into a home, get them services, and get them an entry-level job with your business. For many of these hardest to house people, just stabilizing their lives and keeping them out of harm's way may be the highest aspiration for some because of the level of damage. But I would much rather be upstream doing the preventative stuff. And the problem is, how do you balance in the middle of a 5-alarm fire? How do you balance these two? And I would go one step further because you've sent me very eloquent emails, and over lunch you've made a very eloquent case that an insufficient amount of attention being placed on job creation is also part of a flaw in our strategy. Because creating opportunities for people through the private sector, and if I could, I think we need both. We need both. And if I can put one of our challenges in context, so you don't think that Portland is any way unique. In the lawsuit in Los Angeles in which the federal court threw out their anti-camping ordinance, and as some of you know, Portland statute has similarly been challenged in federal court, and a federal judge under the precedent of this Los Angeles case could throw out our anti-camping ordinance. In that case, the court found that there were 50,000 people sleeping outside every night in Los Angeles. So you compare it to what we have. I will tell you that what I saw in New York was pretty alarming. Last time I was in Seattle, I saw things that were pretty alarming. So it's a national problem. But I agree with you that long term, smart investments in folks that are really have multiple barriers, and as I just on the most compassionate level, we have an obligation to help. Coupled with building the local economy is the right approach. My primary focus right now, though, is housing people that are literally at risk of dying if I don't intervene. I think the city needs to do a better job, as you've commented in the past, being a partner with the private sector to jumpstart our economy.
Yeah, I want to make a quick comment, too, with my PDC hat on. I've had a lot of folks ask if the move of our housing bureau to the new Portland Housing Bureau, wasn't that gutting PDC? Wasn't that a really awful thing to happen? And my response is no, it's been a wonderful thing to happen because
quite frankly, the economic development piece of what PDC has done has always been out of the view of most people, including the commission, because we've spent all of our time dealing with the 511 fires, with the big projects. And by actually moving housing over, and we just have to oversee the dollars, and we're working really well, our commission has a lot more opportunity to not only work on, but shine the light on what's happening on an economic development level. So I can tell you at every board meeting now, we have a presentation on what is going on within the cluster strategy, what we're doing for retention, the whole program. So that little shift of the housing thing has really given the city's economic development. I'm not saying that we weren't doing it before, but we didn't have a strategy. The city's just finally.
Not that it was an easy thing to accomplish.
No.
And I think either Scott nor I had gray hair when we started. That was hard. But the new Portland Housing Bureau officially launched on July 1st of this year. And I think Scott's exactly right. I think what it will ultimately prove to have done is unleashed the best of both sides of this equation. And the focus at PDC will be on economic development. The focus of the city will be on the housing strategy. And to be successful, we'll still have to have an unprecedented level of cooperation. Gene?
Similar type of question. I was looking at this morning, I happened to be looking at the one-night shelter counts for Multnomah County. And so the last one that released shows 4,100 people were homeless when they did the last count. But 53% of those people were people in families. And of the people that were homeless on that one night, there were 1,200 children. And these 1,200 children were not homeless youth. They were homeless children with their families. And I'm just wondering, in light of the programs that LifeWorks offers, or in light of the programs that the state has available, isn't there more that we could do to assist the children in these families to not grow up to be homeless adults?
Great question. And I want to, since Jay Isaac is here from the Trailblazers, I want to borrow the Rose Quarter for a second to make a complimentary point to something that you've just said. So the next time you're in the Rose Garden, let's say you're watching the Trailblazers, and it's a full house, which I think is about 19,000. 20,000 people. Just imagine for a moment that instead of 20,000 adults screaming their lungs out, saying beat LA, what you had was 20,000 children. And if you can imagine that, that's the number of children in just one school district, Portland Public Schools, who live today below the poverty line. So in just one of 6 districts that operate within the jurisdictional lines of the city of Portland, the largest one, with about 47,000 students, just under 20,000 of them live below the poverty line. You could fill the Rose Garden. So it's a staggering problem. And when over the winter, when Gene and I went to one of the Human Solutions warming centers, and we saw families and children in a room, junk food, garish lights, terrible sleeping conditions, it just ripped your heart out. And they were just a small slice. Now, we can spend a lot of time talking about what is it in the family structure and in the societal structure and about adults and children that led us to this situation. I'm reminded that Tony Hobson likes to say we don't have a problem with children in our society, we have a problem with adults. And I think he's spot on. But the reality is we've got all these children now who are homeless or in very unstable housing situations. And what does that mean? It means they can't possibly go to school and be effective learners. We know that. We know that having a stable home is absolutely essential to being a good student. We know that their health issues are likely to be all over the map. And we know that damage is done once you've been on the street or in these transitional situations for a while that you can spend a lifetime trying to reverse. So we want to try to get in front of that. Here's the good news. On a macro level, the city and the county are having serious discussions about revisiting the jurisdictional lines between who does what. The old Resolution A dividing line that said the county does homeless families and children, the city does homeless individuals. Gene and Gretchen and a bunch of people think that's nuts today. And I agree with them. And particularly since we have constrained budgets and the county keeps cutting its budgets, it doesn't make any sense. We shouldn't be running 2 different 2-1-1 systems or 2 different bureaucracies. we should be looking at homeless people, and we should be looking at available dollars and matching them up in a much smarter way. So we are actively talking about ways of breaking down that wall. Secondly, in a year in which the city cut budgets by an average of 4%, general fund bureaus, public safety was protected a little bit. The mayor and my colleagues agreed to give us $3.5 million of one-time only money to deal with the emergency housing. And that basically funds the safety net of emergency shelter and other things, and the pass-through dollars we send to the county to deal with homeless children. And as part of that, the mayor gave us $1 million without restriction, kind of $1 million to do something really great with. And we have a working group, of which a number of you are parties, where we're trying to figure out how to leverage that $1 million to get at some of the most acute needs. That's on the table, how we might carve out some money for kids, but it's about something where we can make an immediate impact and leverage the hell out of the investment. And so I think structural change, I think how we spend our money, but ultimately, if the county of Multnomah continues to have to cut budgets because the state tax situation is so out of whack, we're going to continue to pay the price at the family level. And I know that many of you are involved in nonprofits and through your churches or whatever, and I'm not here to lecture anybody, but if you, at Christmas time, if you're in one of these emergency shelters with families and you see these kids, it tears your heart out. And once you get past the how the hell could this happen in America piece, the question is what do we do? And ideally, rent assistance to keep people from falling into this situation, or emergency shelter to get them housing. And that costs money. That costs money. And that is our fundamental challenge. David?
First of all, I'm glad to hear you talking about changing Resolution A. I was in the room when that passed, and it was just a group of people in the early 80s trying to make a decision about how to manage services then. That was 30 years ago, and our community has changed, and the city and the county have changed. It's time to really look at that. So I certainly applaud that. I think it's important. One area where housing with services is preventive is in the area of institutionalization. When I look at senior services, which, as you know, I'm very engaged in, we see a lot of low-income seniors unnecessarily fall over the cliff into Medicaid-funded nursing homes because they don't have the capacity to make available to themselves some of the small services that might make it possible for them to remain in affordable housing longer. We can have a significant impact on that population, on people with special needs and disabilities who would otherwise fall into institutional care. The question I have is, there's a debate happening now in Salem about whether to build another mental health hospital. And I'm wondering what your perspective is, given the fact that perhaps a housing with services model could have a very different impact on that same population and provide a community-based alternative that could be, one, less expensive, and two, perhaps more acceptable to all the people receiving services.
You know, you and Kay would be able to answer this much better than I. I mean, I'd hesitate to wade in on that one, other than to say that when we did the deinstitutionalization, there were supposed to be community-based providers and programs, and we don't have them. And when we do try to cite them, we often have big fights with communities about the citing issues. The group homes where people could live and take care of each other, and there's some wonderful nonprofits doing that. We didn't have the infrastructure in place when we took people out of the hospitals, and now it looks like the legislature is rethinking that approach of making the investment in the hospital without a consideration of putting dollars into a community-based approach. So I think what's going to happen is, once again, we're likely, because of the state budget problems, we're going to get swamped. What's essentially a federal and state concern is going to impact us, and we're going to be swamped, and we're going to be asked to, once again, pick up the cost locally. So I would love to talk to you and get your views on the state hospital. What I will say about older adults, we are becoming a place that older adults choose to move to, choose to retire, want to stay. And one of the reasons is it's a livable city, and we have accessible things, and older adults like, they like the fact we have these trails and greenways and other things. It's a healthy city. When we fought this last budget cycle to keep the funding for our senior rec programs in our various rec programs, just to put the human face on this, because I think sometimes these budget fights seem like abstractions, who is the typical person we're serving in a senior rec program through Portland Parks and Rec? She is 70 years old, single, low income, and is poor. Or I already got that one, so there's a fourth. Single, female, low income. There's a fourth category. 70. So this is not someone that's choosing between the Mac Club and Portland Parks, and Mount Scott. And think about what happens if we close the door to that person, and they were at home, not in a communal setting, not getting some exercise, not feeling useful and engaged. These are terrible, terrible challenges, and ultimately they come down to prudent decisions about budget, and they come down to can we build the team, public and private, government, faith, nonprofit, business, to come together to help solve these problems. Looking around this room, I know that that's what you've tapped in your audience, so we're talking to converted. But that's the model that's going to carry us through this. Everybody's got a role, and everyone has to dig a little deeper to get through this storm. Yeah.
So, being a bloodsucking journalist that generalizes and editorializes and things like that, it seems to me that much of what, and I appreciate everything you do, that a lot of the solutions that you are speaking about today are directing toward us. Come back to what Clayton mentioned briefly, and I thought he would mention more jobs in a state that relies on income taxes. Our ability to provide public services is funded by income taxes. So a lot of what you're addressing touches jobs, and jobs touch many of the problems we face as a community. Certainly as a region, and you're elected by the city of Portland, but you address the concept of Multnomah County. The regional problems are also regional solutions or requirements. LifeWorks Northwest embodies that in terms of how many regions, how many counties, how many cities it serves. So I grew up in North Portland, but now live in Tigard, and I see what Washington County's doing, and I wonder how does that relate to your criticism of others not providing service in a comparable or basis. Community Partners for Affordable Housing is doing remarkable things, maybe on a scalable basis, to provide for affordable housing. Tigard just opened construction on a 40-unit affordable housing center. So as this blood-sucking journalist who sometimes is criticized for broad brush statements and generalizations, how does your comment about the region not doing its share, where does that specifically occur? What communities are not doing their share? And how can we provide solutions that are regional, not just city?
Oh, we might get an editorial out of this. we have, and Steve, we have some hard numbers we'll share with you, and it's what are the cities and counties spending on homeless services, on housing, and in terms of in the aggregate, and then individual in the counties and the cities, they're just not making much of an investment, and ultimately, what most people in the region know is that the person that has the biggest challenge and need can come downtown Portland and get served.
So can we share your leadership and some of the solutions? Obviously, some are embodied specifically in PDC, but can we share some of those solutions and resources, knowledge, to provide for understanding beyond the city of Portland, Multnomah County, and, for example, expand what some of these communities are doing? Like Washington County is doing, on a scalable basis, some significant things. I don't know about Black West County or Gresham, for example.
No, we're obviously interested in having everyone carry their fair share, and then we can debate, what is the fair share and what's the capacity. The point you made earlier about the regional perspective, I think, is interesting, because increasingly we are beginning to think of these things regionally. I was at a JPAC meeting today at at Metro, and we were talking about how to allocate money between a small pot of discretionary money between freight and active transportation, which is trails, bicycles, things like that. We're looking at it regionally. I've been criticized a little bit recently in the paper for the 20-year stewardship, predated me, of Washington, of Forest Park. And, you know, Forest Park is 5,000 acres, and it is in some risk, but it's a regional resource, and it's part of about 30,000 acres of regional natural areas that are at risk. Every time we have a discussion about a bridge that's falling apart, you know, there's someone who says, well, that's a regional problem, we're going to pay for it. I think that our instinct is often right when we think that these are regional assets, regional problems, there needs to be a regional solution. I think the problem is, historically, Portland's just in a different position to pay for it. And I think the next big challenge in the regional debate is regional equity. And I think it's very convenient for our regional partners to constantly criticize Portland for being out of step on the cost side. But one of the reasons our cost structure is a lot out of whack is that Portland is covering the tab for a lot more than just Portland. And I think we have to start quantifying that, we have to document it, we have to talk about it, because I think ultimately it's part of the challenge we have. Not unlike lots of cities like us, but we end up disproportionately carrying the load for the region. But I'll get you some hard numbers, because the numbers sort of tell the story.
So one more question.
Yeah, back to the hospital issue. In my career, I was involved in the deinstitutionalization to hospitals from Medford up to Portland for small emergency facilities similar to Riles, and then somewhat similar to what you've just opened. Then beyond that, I did the forecast for the state hospital where we are now and the 1,000 beds that are required. In that forecast, the assumption is why it was only 1,000 beds and not larger was that the state would be able to open 10 to 20 facilities, about 200 slots per year to catch the patients coming out of the state hospital. Historically, they've only been able to ever really do that because of NIMBY issues, even of maybe a third of that.
Yeah.
So I think, first of all, your solution on the housing, that is the solution, because I did a back of a postcard analysis that showed the state runs a general fund Medicaid program that would run out of general fund in about 10 years under the model of let's put 200 really expensive beds out there. But that's really where we are now. You're going to be doing the housing. My question is really stepping back, where's the general fund going to come from to power the supportive resources at the housing level? In terms of your kind of facility you just opened, you'd need, even if the state doesn't do what it does, you only need about 3 like what you have in Portland, and that'll take care of the emergency hospital end of it. But where are we going to get the general funds to power the Medicaid portion of the model?
Well, that's the $64,000 question. I mean, we are reasonably good at figuring out ways to generate the capital dollars, right? And we do it through a mix of public and private tools. And while the 30% set aside dries up pretty substantially for in the urban renewal districts for housing, dries up substantially within 3 years, it will have generated hundreds of millions of dollars of capital dollars for construction. And we're pretty creative on that front. The operating side is the real challenge. And the original model was we'd look to our county partners to help us with the operating dollars. Well, they don't have operating dollars for any of the things that are, at the level they need.
It's about 25 cents on the dollar if you take into account the seniors as along with the Medicaid, of the new Medicare model, because the new health care reform bill is going to put people, pretty much everybody, at the lower end onto a Medicaid system if we can fund it with the local general fund of 25 cents on the dollar.
So we do a lot of triage. We have some general fund dollars going into this. We're trying to be creative with other dollars, but the operating side is the biggest challenge. And if we cannot fund the services in some of these beds that we're rolling out, the units, then what we'll end up having to do at some point is make a judgment about pulling the services. And if you pull the services, then it changes the mix of people you can put in those units. And what you've done is you've left some of the most vulnerable people over here and outside while housing others. But, I mean, that challenge of how we do our operating time, if I could be king for a day, I would say to our president, just like, you know, Roosevelt built post offices during a recession, depression, and invested in lots of public infrastructure. I think today the investment in housing is the best investment you can make at the federal level. And if you look locally, the federal investment in housing puts cranes in the air, which means jobs, creates infrastructure, provides housing for people. And here in Portland, we bring a green dividend to the table, and we can make these, you know, LEED platinum, LEED silver, LEED gold, and make them pretty sustainable. And this is the time to do it. If I were to, you know, if the president asked me for any advice, not that he's likely, I would say if you're gonna you know, do some deficit spending, for God's sake, do it in an area where you can have a long-term impact. And I think housing, you could probably make the case should go to the head of the line in terms of long-term infrastructure impact on communities. But unless we come up with the dollars on the service side, that part of our machine is going to grind to a halt. Dave, do you have
Yeah, well, first of all, of course, if we don't invest in those services at the community-based level, people are going to end up in much more costly institutional care or in our criminal justice system and so on. We're going to pay for it one way or another. So in terms of social policy, it makes way more sense. We're involved in a housing with services pilot project, or the development of one, involving the Roschnitzer Tower and a few other buildings in the downtown area ultimately. One of the things that we've been talking to the state about is that we have been spending funds to pay for security, building security services. Rather than use those funds for building security services, what we've suggested to the state is, what if we gave you $100,000 and you use it as Medicaid match, and then contracted back with an entity that could provide services in our building that will triple the amount of money available, and it's a use of funds that will, one, it'll meet the security need anyway, but it'll do way more than that. And I think that there are opportunities for us to think creatively about how to use foundation resources, public resources, and any other charitable resources to create Medicaid match that could really.
And I know we're coming to the end of your time, but I just want to say hallelujah. That's a
That's a great idea.
My wife said Havra Shalom. I think that's a Yiddish expression.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. And what I would say on the leverage side that we ought to keep our eye on is that, for example, when the city invests with Central City Concern around the BEST program, the Benefit Eligibility Specialist program, they then leverage those dollars to get people on SSI. And it brings hundreds of millions of dollars back to the community. When we fund Cash Oregon, and they help people qualify for the Earned Income Tax Credit, that brings a ton of money back, you know, and on and on and on. So we are especially mindful that there's investments we can make in things that then leverage entitlements and other programs, which then bring the dollars in to help, you know, us through this storm.
Great. Thank you.
Hey, thanks very much. Thank you.
So I think I proved today that you know, if you really want to get a good presentation, you pick somebody who's a bit passionate about the subject, and certainly Nick is. Before I forget, I promised to thank the blood-sucking journalist next time I saw him. Let's give him a hand for sponsorship and all the lunch today. Appreciate that. We're planning the next event for this, and I'd really like you, as you look around the room, the idea of this is to raise the visibility of LifeWorks and kind of what we do and what we do in the community. But what we want to do is introduce ourselves to new people. So what I'd like you to think about is two things. One, if there's a topic or a speaker that you think would be a great idea, let us know. And two, next time you come to one of these, bring somebody that you think, you know, could use this kind of information, that would really learn something and maybe get interested in it and get involved in it. I think that would really, really be helpful. We're talking about an event in the fall, and we're talking about Ted Wheeler, who actually had promised before he moved on as state treasurer to come and talk. Ted had quite an experience as chairman as we all know, with this issue, and it'd be kind of interesting to see what he has to say from his new perspective. So thank you again, and I got to tell you, thank you for your service to the city. I never wanted to be an elected official. Now that I'm a quasi-elected official, I never want to be an elected official. My wife would kill me anyway, but you know, it's a difficult job, and we appreciate what you do for the city, and I hope most of our criticism is constructive.
It's very constructive.
I get it as well. So thank you all for being here today. Really appreciate it, and look forward to